This is an instructional plan for varied ages, in this case ages 16 and up without disabilities, but this lesson could be taught for ages 7 and up as long as the students have the necessary motor and attentional skills to complete the lesson safely. This lesson will list and teach the supplies and steps needed to properly hand sew a 2-hole button onto fabric using a thread and needle. Hi students! I know you've each asked me to sew a button on for you before, and it can be a really helpful skill to have because it can come in handy if you need to make a repair to your own clothes in a pinch. Instead of getting rid of clothes, you can fix them if you know how to sew the button back on yourself. To make sure we all stay safe and learn the most we can from this lesson, you should all be listening carefully and keeping your eyes on me and my supplies at all times. So to make sure you are listening to that beginning, before we get started, where do you need to keep your eyes during the lesson? Joseph?
On you and your supplies.
Great. Good job. I knew you were paying attention and listening. You need to keep your eyes on me and my supplies at all times. And how should you be listening, Rachel?
Carefully.
Exactly. Let's get started. We'll have to start with a review of what we already know. How many holes can a button have? Joseph?
4.
4?
2.
Great job. Rachel, how many holes can a button have?
2 or 4.
Great job. And what is this? Joseph?
Thread.
Great. And Rachel, what is this?
Needles.
Great. That is a needle. Now I'm going to tell you all the supplies you need to sew on a button. You will need scissors, thread, a needle, a button, and fabric, or an item that you're sewing your button onto. And Joseph, can you tell me what supplies you need to sew on a button?
Scissors, thread, needle, button, and fabric, or an item you're going to sew the button onto.
Great job. And Rachel, is the needle we use dull?
No, it's sharp.
Exactly. We have to be careful because needles are sharp. With that in mind, let's move on to learning how to sew on our button. I'll tell you the steps we'll follow to sew the button on. Today we'll be starting with just a 2-hole button, and once we learn these, I'll show you how to follow them. Listen carefully. First, gather your supplies. Second, cut your thread. Third, thread your needle. To do this, you fold your thread and put both ends through your needle. 4, put your button on the fabric and push your needle up through 1 hole. 5, push your needle down through your 2nd hole and through the loop of your thread. 6, pull tight and push the needle up through your 1st hole and down through your 2nd hole. You repeat step 6 3 times. And our last step, sew 3 stitches around the thread on the bottom and cut your thread. Joseph, can you tell me our first 2 steps?
Gather your supplies and cut your thread.
Exactly, good job. Rachel, can you tell me steps 3 and 4?
Thread your needle by folding your thread and putting both ends through your needle. And 4, put your button on the fabric and push your needle up through 1 hole.
Exactly. Joseph, can you tell me steps 5 and 6?
5, put your needle down through the 2nd hole and through your loop of thread. 6, pull tight and push the needle up through your 1st hole and down through the 2nd 3 times.
Exactly. I know that was a lot to remember. Rachel, can you finish up with step 7?
Sew 3 stitches around the thread on the bottom and cut your thread.
Exactly. Now let's think about some questions. When I sew on a button, do I start by gathering my supplies? Yes. How do I know? Because first, I gather my supplies, and then I follow the rest of the steps. When I sew on a button, do I place my button first? No. How do I know? Because I need to gather my supplies, cut my thread, and thread my needle before I place my button. When I sew on a button, what step comes after putting my button on the fabric and pushing my needle up through 1 hole? Pushing my needle down through the 2nd hole and through the loop of thread. How do I know? Because after putting my button on the fabric and pushing my needle through the 1 hole, I push my needle down through the 2nd hole and through my loop of thread. Joseph, when I sew on a button, do I cut my thread first?
No, you gather your supplies and then you cut your thread.
Exactly. Great job. Rachel, when you thread your needle, do you fold your thread?
Yes, fold your thread and put both ends through your needle.
Great. And how do you know?
Because step 3 tells us to thread our needle by folding your thread and putting both ends through your needle.
Great. One last question. Joseph, do I repeat step 6 2 times?
No, you repeat it 3 times.
How do you know?
Because it says to repeat step 6 3 times.
Exactly. Great job. Now I think we're ready to try and sew one on. Since this process has a lot of steps, I'm going to repeat it one more time before we start. Listen carefully and look at the poster. First, gather your supplies. Second, cut your thread. Third, thread your needle by folding your thread and putting both ends through the needle. Fourth, put your button on the fabric and push your needle up through one hole. Fifth, push your needle down through the second hole and through your loop of thread. Sixth, pull tight and push needle up through your first hole and down through your second hole 3 times. And seventh, sew 3 stitches around the thread on the bottom and cut your thread. Now I want you to watch as I follow each step and sew on a button. First, I need to gather my supplies. So I have my scissors, thread, needle, button, and fabric. Second, I need to cut my thread. Third, I need to thread my needle. So I fold my thread in half, get my needle, and put both ends through my needle. Fourth, I put my button on top of my fabric and push my needle up through one hole. Make sure you don't pull the thread all the way through. Fifth, I push my needle down through the second hole and I put it through the loop of thread on the bottom. Sixth, I pull it very tight and I push my needle up through the first hole again and down through the second hole. That's 1 time, 2 times, and 3 times. My last step 7 is I sew 3 stitches around the thread on the bottom. 1, 2, and 3. And I cut my thread. And there you have your button sewn on. So, now I'm going to sew on another button with your help. Rachel, what do I do first?
Gather your supplies.
Great. How do you know?
Because step 1 tells us to gather our supplies.
Great job. Joseph, can you tell me what supplies I need to gather?
You need scissors, thread, a button, a needle, and your fabric.
And my fabric. Great. You're right. Now, what's my next step, Rachel?
Cut your thread.
Great job. What's next, Joseph?
To thread your needle by folding your thread in half and then putting both ends through the needle.
Great job. And what comes next? Oh. Should I put just one end of my thread through the needle, Joseph?
No, you should put both ends through your needle.
Exactly. Great job. Now that that's done, what's next, Rachel?
Put your button on the fabric and push your needle up through one hole.
Great job. Look closely so you can see how I'm doing it. Wow, seems like we're really getting the hang of it. What do I do next, Joseph?
You put your needle through the second hole and through the loop on the other side.
Great. All right, all set. What's next, Rachel?
Pull tight and push needle up through your first hole and down through the second hole 3 times.
All right, and how many times do I need to do that again?
3 times.
Perfect. I'll go up through my first hole and down through my second hole 3 times. And Joseph, how do I finish up?
You sew 3 stitches around the thread on the bottom and then cut your thread.
All right. Look closely because this can be a tricky step. 1, 2, 3. Tricky. And 3. All right, and cut my thread. Here we go, a newly attached button. Thanks for all your help. Great job, guys. Now that you've seen me follow those steps twice, Rachel, can you tell me the first 3 steps?
1, gather your supplies. 2, cut your thread. 3, thread your needle by folding your thread in half and putting both ends through your needle.
Great job. Joseph, what are our next 2 steps?
4, put your button on the fabric and push your needle up through 1 hole, and then 5, push your needle down through the second hole and through the loop of thread on the other side.
We're getting really good. Rachel, can you tell me our last 2?
6, pull tight and push the needle up through your first hole and down through your second hole. Repeat that step 3 times. And finally 7, sew 3 stitches around the thread on the bottom and cut your thread.
Wow, I'm so impressed with how well you did today. Today we learned the useful skill of sewing on a button. We talked about the supplies you need and the 7 steps you need to follow to sew on a button. Remember, you need to work carefully when using this handy skill. Great job today, everyone. Now we can enjoy our snacks. Woo! Now that we've finished our lesson and our snacks, everyone, how many times do I need to repeat step 6?
3 times.
Exactly right. And how do you know?
Because step 6 tells us to repeat it 3 times.
Exactly. Awesome job, everyone.